Good evening and welcome to our Julian Assange event on Student Press Freedom Day. The future of Gen Z journalism depends on the freedom of Julian Assange. I'm SusanMcLucas, co-organizer with Paula Iasella of Boston Area Assange Defense, a group of local activists committed to Julian Assange's freedom. We have been speaking out on the streets of Boston to raise awareness on the plight of Julian Assange for over 2 years. The task of informing an uninformed public is challenging. We begin our rallies giving an overview of who Julian Assange is and WikiLeaks, the organization he created, to give whistleblowers a secure, anonymous media platform to publish their leaks. We explain what Assange published through WikiLeaks in the public's interest, the documents that won him international journalism awards, but at the same time angered the powerful, putting him in the crosshairs of the US government and landing him in a supermax prison. Thankfully, we have a wonderful 12-minute video clip which covers the Assange case in a concise way. Stella Morris Assange, Julian Assange's wife and mother of his 2 children, narrates this May 2022 video. Assange's extradition has been approved by the UK High Court. He now awaits in limbo the UK High Court ruling on the defense's perfected grounds of appeal. Julian Assange continues to be held without bail, unconvicted, in solitary confinement since April 11th, 2019. The process is the punishment. This confinement of uncertain duration is itself a type of torture. A quick thank you and shout out to independent news outlet Double Down News that kindly granted us permission to stream the video tonight. Thank you. Please see all the links in the YouTube description. We will watch this short video first to help give an overview of the critical events of the case. After the film, we'll bring in our speakers to begin their conversation on the Julian Assange case, press freedom, and the future of journalism. Much gratitude to our 4 guests: DC journalist Esther Everum, host of On the Ground, Voices of Resistance from the Nation's Capital; author Jeremy Kuzmarov, who's the managing editor of Covert Action magazine; journalist Sam Carliner; and Swarthmore College senior Tarang Saluja, who's an activist and journalist. Also, a sincere thank you to our co-sponsor, the Community Church of Boston, to Dean Stevens, Amar Ahmad, and their staff's tireless work to bring us a full schedule of underreported news from around the world. They are a conduit and platform for important local and international voices to share their stories. Thank you. Now let's begin our program with Double Down News's video, Stella Assange's The CIA Plot to Kill My Husband, Julian Assange.
Are happy to talk about political prisoners abroad, but they've created a political prisoner of their own. At every stage, the law has been abused in order to victimize Julian. He has been silenced, he has been disappeared. The last time allowed to attend his own court hearing was in January 2021. Every time he's requested to be there in person, those requests have been denied. Julian did nothing wrong. He exposed war crimes committed by known individuals. Those who committed the war crimes or responsible for those war crimes have not been held accountable. Julian is in prison because WikiLeaks is a service. In the secrets that states keep the most hidden, Julian revealed war crimes by the US government, the world's superpower, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the fact that it had normalized, institutionalized torture. And that superpower took revenge. The position of the UK right now is that it will extradite a publisher to the country that conspired to murder him. How can the UK government even contemplate the extradition of the man who the US was trying to assassinate? This assassination plot was as revenge for what WikiLeaks had published. When I read the story, I was relieved in a way, because this is the reality that Julian has been facing. And there has been a lot of gaslighting. For years when he was in the embassy, the refrain was that Julian was paranoid, that no one was trying to prosecute him. The only one that was keeping him in the embassy was himself. And as soon as he was arrested, The true reality was there for everyone to see. So it was extremely important that this came to light. The story has over 30 US intelligence officials, including very senior and named, going on record and saying that the US government was actively plotting to assassinate Julian inside the UK. This is incredible. This is a country plotting to assassinate a journalist because of what he has published. This is precisely what the UK government criticizes in other states. Conspiring to murder a journalist is wrong. It's wrong if Russia does it, and it's wrong if the United States does it too. But there's a lot of this story that we still don't know. How much did the UK government know? How far was the UK government willing to go along with the US government's plans under the CIA directorship of Mike Pompeo? These are questions that remain unanswered.
Why does the United States destroy its reputation like that? Because the desire for authority is much higher than the desire for morality. The desire to be seen as a vicious authority that can terrorize people is higher than the desire to be seen as an authority that commands respect as a result of its integrity.
The United States government is the only one that has committed crimes here. Julian has done nothing wrong. By prosecuting Julian for doing the right thing, they're also denying the existence and the validity of what he exposed. Because the United States is not a member of the International Criminal Court, the only accountability that exists is the exposure through WikiLeaks of the fact that these people were killed. So by prosecuting Julian, they're not just prosecuting Julian, they're putting the memory of all those people in prison too.
Light them all up. Hey, Roger. Keep shooting.
There's no question that the information that WikiLeaks published about the Iraq and Afghan wars and Guantanamo Bay was in the public interest. Julian is being prosecuted under the 1917 Espionage Act. That act was enacted during the First World War. US constitutional lawyers have long worried that the broad wording of the Espionage Act would be repurposed in order to go after the press. The Trump administration decided to prosecute Julian and WikiLeaks because the agenda of the Trump administration was to target the press. The US First Amendment is the gold standard globally on press freedom, and the prosecution against Julian is the single greatest attack there has been on the First Amendment, and that is Trump's legacy. My message to Joe Biden is that you are furthering the worst legacy of the Trump administration. Don't let this also be your legacy. Drop this case. If you don't drop this case will be used by future administrations in order to silence dissent, in order to silence the press. This is the most serious attack on press freedom there has ever been. The United States government is saying that any person, anywhere, is bound by the US Espionage Act. This is a completely absurd and dangerous proposition. Julian is not a US citizen. He's an Australian citizen who was working as a journalist in the United Kingdom. He owes no allegiance to the US government. He received information from a source, Chelsea Manning, and he published it. That's all he did. And now the United States is threatening Julian with a life sentence, 175 years. It advances the absurd notion that a country can limit press freedom beyond its borders, that it can crack down on foreign journalists abroad. Imagine if Turkey now uses the same logic that the US has used to say that a British journalist in France should be extradited to Turkey because that journalist exposed some state-sponsored crime of Turkey's, or Saudi Arabia or China. Every journalist should be alarmed about this, because if they can do it to someone as high profile as Julian, then everyone else can suffer the same fate. The fact that people have such a poor understanding about this case is down to the media. It is the media's responsibility to properly report this case, and it has not been properly reported. And that's why the public is so ignorant about it.
My favorite allegation is that I'm a cat torturer. No, seriously, AFP, Agence France Presse, put that everywhere, even into the New York Times. I don't really know where to start for people who aren't familiar with this kind of disgusting machine that the media is.
Now, why has the media reported so poorly about this case? Part of the reason is because Julian is a media critic. He's not just a publisher, but he has been very critical of the way that the media has reported, for example, WikiLeaks publications. WikiLeaks also poses a challenge to the legacy media because the WikiLeaks model is what Julian calls scientific journalism, to publish original source documents alongside the analysis in order to allow the reader to draw their own conclusions, to access the same information that the journalists did in order to assess the material themselves. And that's why WikiLeaks is such an important resource for academics and historians, not just journalists. Because Julian's case is a political case, it's entirely up to the political circumstances what is possible and what is not possible. The case is so outrageous that it should be thrown out. It is also politically dangerous and counterproductive for the United Kingdom. By prosecuting Julian, they lose their ability to claim the moral high ground.
We have seen already from Vladimir Putin's regime in the use of the munitions that they have already been dropping on innocent civilians, Mr. Speaker, in my view, already fully qualifies as a war crime. And I know that the ICC prosecutor is already investigating, and I'm sure the whole House will support that.
The fact the UK is now calling out war crimes in relation to the Ukraine, it follows that the UK should not extradite a publisher who put evidence of war crimes into the public domain.
There does appear to be evidence of war crimes in this material. An example is the Task Force 373 HIMARS missile strike on a house which killed 7 children. Well, we would like to see this material, the revelations that this material gives, be taken seriously, investigated by governments, and new policies put in place as a result, if not prosecutions of those people who have committed abuses.
Since the 11th of April 2019, Julian has been inside Belmarsh High Security Prison, which is the harshest prison in the UK, known as Britain's Guantanamo Bay. He's been inside Belmarsh Prison day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, in a small prison cell on his own for most of the day. His interactions are with prisoners, some of which are dangerous. He is suffering greatly. He suffered a mini stroke in October, and obviously that's a sign that his health is in serious decline. It's also a difficult struggle for him mentally. Julian suffers from clinical depression. He has all his adult life. And it's obviously very difficult for him spending so much time in isolation away from his children and from his family and friends. I have 2 children with Julian. They are 3 and 4. Our eldest was born when Julian was still in the embassy in 2017, and he would go to the embassy to visit Julian. We kept it secret so a friend would come in posing as his father, until a guard from the embassy approached me outside the embassy and said that I shouldn't bring the baby in anymore because they had been instructed to steal a nappy in order to analyze the baby's DNA. Our youngest just turned 3. He was a few weeks old when Julian was first arrested. And he's only ever seen his father inside Belmarsh Prison. For both of them, the only memories they have of Julian is inside Belmarsh Prison. Because I don't know how long our children will have with their father, if they just have a few months maybe, before Julian's taken to the United States and will most likely lose his life there. I try to make their experience with their father as enjoyable and light as possible. I don't talk about the fact that we're going to a prison. I've just said that there are bad people that are preventing Julian from coming home, but that he wants to be at home. But obviously when they go into the prison, they experience the prison. They walk past the razor wire, they get sniffed by the sniffer dogs, they have to get searched multiple times going into the prison, inside their mouth and under their feet. So they experience it themselves. But I don't want the experience to be scary or intimidating. So I do my best to make it a normal situation. The only thing that matters to me is to be able to reunite my family again. Julian has been deprived of being able to see his children grow up day to day. All we want is to be a normal family. The fact that he's being deprived from his family for no reason at all, just out of a spiteful, cruel sense of vengeance by the superpower who he exposed, has to come to an end. No one should be treated this way. I ask each of you to help me fight for Julian. Go to don'textraditeassange.com. There's a tab that says Take Action. Take all the actions where it says Take Action. Write to your MP. come to the protests. There may be a way that you are especially placed to help me free Julian. Please contact me directly. Every person can contribute to help fight for his freedom, help bring him home, help reunite Julian with our young children. It is incredibly important that stories that don't get enough airtime in the mainstream media are able to be covered elsewhere. I encourage each person that can afford it to support independent journalists, independent media like Double Down News. So if you can, please support Double Down News on Patreon.
Welcome, panelists. Let's begin with Esther Iverom. Esther is an author, multidisciplinary artist, and independent journalist. She produces and hosts the podcast On the Ground, Voices of Resistance from the Nation's Capital, which is available nationally on Pacifica Radio. Esther has a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism from the University of Southern California and a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University. She was a staff writer on several corporate media newspapers early in her career. She has created pioneering and award-winning content for critical voices in the arts, media, and politics. Esther is what we call an activist journalist, as she can often be found not only reporting on international and local social justice movements, but she also shows up locally to speak at the rallies. Thank you, Esther, for giving voice to the voiceless. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We are pleased to welcome New Jersey-based journalist Sam Carliner. His Code Pink article, The Future of Gen Z Journalism Depends on Julian Assange's Freedom, inspired tonight's panel discussion for Student Press Freedom Day. Sam has a bachelor's degree in journalism from Montclair State University and is especially interested in covering foreign policy, climate change, and U.S. imperialism. Sam covered the 2021 street actions in Washington, D.C., hours ahead of the UK court's January 4th ruling not to extradite Julian Assange to the US. He writes for Code Pink, Common Dreams, Truth Out, and other news outlets with an anti-imperialist perspective. Welcome, Sam. Thank you, Tarang Saluja, for joining us this evening. We had the pleasure of meeting Tarang at our October 2022 street action in Boston, where he spoke eloquently on the prosecution of Assange. We discovered afterwards that he had written articles on the Assange case for his school's newspaper, The Phoenix. Tarang is a senior at Swarthmore College, currently studying computer science, mathematics, and philosophy. He co-hosts a labor radio show on Swarthmore WSRN Sundays at 5 p.m. Tarang organizes toward a living wage and better working conditions at the college and supports labor actions in Philadelphia. As a journalist, he reports on and amplifies important social justice movements. Welcome, Tarang. I would like to introduce Jeremy Kuzmarov next. Thank you, Jeremy, for moderating this evening's panel discussion. Jeremy has authored 4 books on U.S. foreign policy, including Obama's Unending Wars. He used the WikiLeaks archives as an important resource for parts of that book. Jeremy has taught at numerous universities and colleges in the field of U.S. history and foreign relations and has contributed to many progressive publications. He hopes that his writing will broaden his readers' worldview and help raise awareness about societal issues and injustices. Jeremy is managing editor of Covert Action magazine and has just returned home to Tulsa, Oklahoma from Washington, D.C., having reported on the Rage Against the War Machine rally. Welcome, Jeremy. Why don't we start there? Please share some highlights from your article on the rally and the large Free Assange contingent present at the rally, with many of the speakers calling for Julian's freedom.
Okay, well, thank you. This is a great event, and yeah, it was great to hear from Stella Assange, and I would echo many of the points she made. What I can do is put the article in the chat. We'll see if this works, so people can access that article about the rally that just took place. Yeah, so good. So people can take a look at that article. And yeah, I think a lot of the speakers, as you say, I mean, it was a nice event. It brought together people from different political outlook in some cases. And it was a nice spirit to the event. And there were some, yeah, really good speeches, identifying, I think, cancer in our society that Julian Assange was exposing, the military industrial complex and the permanent warfare state and the crimes of the U.S. empire. And Chris Hedges and his gave a powerful speech, and he was referring to a decaying empire and the excesses and the corruption and the just evil associated with this decaying empire. And I think that was what Julian was exposing. And I think it's a resource. Stella Assange pointed out his that material is a resource for historian for future generations and for this current generation. Often it takes decades before these kind of documents are released before the public. And in a democracy, I mean, we should know what our government is doing, especially when they're doing bad things. We have a right. I mean, it goes back to founding fathers, and Thomas Jefferson said, I mean, the government had to be kept in check, and he supported periodic rebellions, when the government became really corrupt. And I mean, the documents from Assange give us ample evidence, combined with other stuff we know, that this government has gone totally off the rails, and it's threatening everybody. It's threatening a world war right now. It's not addressing major catastrophe like climate crisis. So we have to act as citizens, and again, one can't say enough about the value of the documents that Julian helped release for people to better understand how that government operates. And in my study, Obama, well, I used those documents in two studies. One was a study I did on police training program in the Cold War, but the last chapter dealt with Iraq and Afghanistan and how it represented a continuity of U.S. foreign policies, from the Cold War and the Vietnam era. And the WikiLeaks documents here were very valuable as far as offering a window into U.S. counterinsurgency operations. And they exposed a lot of the corruption of the U.S. allies in Afghanistan. Like there were a lot of logs about a case, just like drug smuggling among U.S. allies or police officials and army officials or people close to Hamid Karzai and other leaders. And that was similar to Vietnam. I studied the case of Vietnam, where the U.S. was aligned with a very corrupt government in South Vietnam, which was also controlling the drug trade. So it's a window into the dark side of the U.S. empire and the U.S. alliance with these corrupt elements, and how the U.S. facilitates corruption, and how these counterinsurgency operations. And some of it was just about abuses in those counterinsurgency operations, as well as the kind of methods. And you can better understand the thinking of the people carrying out those operations. So if people have the time to go through it, it's really invaluable to understanding what was going on and seeing what was wrong and seeing the light and deceit. And the Obama study, one telling there was stuff about Libya, and there was some really shady business with Hillary Clinton that was exposed in some of those emails that were released. And one thing that really struck out to me was there was one email where it was a series of email with, I think, some of Hillary Clinton's people who worked for her and people who were advising the President Obama. And they were worried about these right-wing attacks on Obama that made him appear to be weak. So they're like strategizing, how do we make him look strong? And, they're promoting, like, kind of ramping up the drone war. And they say, oh, we got to make him look strong. And they come up with this idea that he's to, be like Zeus the Avenger. And they're promoting the drone war, that, they turn him into this kind of assassin. So I saw it as a kind of sad window into American political culture, that they feel they have to make this guy look tough, like a comic book assassin, basically. But I mean, social movements ought to know what they're up against. Those of us who are on the decent side, who don't want to see the government just going around killing people, often civilians, killing people without due process, which is what was going on in the drone war and has been going on. you know, it is valuable just to see how the policymakers think and see how screwed up American political culture is, and it's not so easy to change that culture, but at least, you know, we have better understanding of what's going on, thanks to Mr. Assange. And yeah, I think as all of us agree, it's an outrage the way he was treated. And yeah, one thing, in one of my studies, like when I published it and somebody reviewed it, and they said, like, I was one of the few historians who actually read through some of those documents and used it as a source. So I think it is a great repository, but historians are not using it enough. And I think they're afraid, or there's this stigma that Stella talked about, that Assange was smeared so badly in the media that he becomes this, like, you know, bad person, and people don't want to associate with him. So that gets to the effect of the media demonization. And I think it's up to, you know, social movements to try and spread the truth that Assange really did a great deed for society, and those who value democracy will respect what he did, will try and, you know, when they have time, review some of those documents. They can see for themselves the corruption that he's exposing, and they'll champion his cause and his release. So I can turn it over to the others now, who maybe speak a bit, and then we can maybe open up for broader discussion. So who wants to go next? Whoever, yeah, I think the order doesn't really matter. So maybe, well, we can go on my screen. We'll just go, maybe I have Tarang, Sam, and then Esther on my screen. So if Tarang, you want to step up.
Sure, that sounds good. Thank you so much. So yeah, as Jeremy was sort of speaking about how the media had smeared Assange so much and had such a concentrated smear campaign against him, that is definitely something that I can sort of speak to, because I think that was the case for me for some time too, that I was very deeply influenced by the smear campaign that was against Assange. For much of my time in high school, which is when sort of Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy, there were always these articles coming out about him, which were vilifying him so much. And it wasn't until I started getting involved with labor that I started to sort of recognize the game that was being played. So speaking for myself personally, during the COVID pandemic, I got COVID. I was sick for quite a bit. It like exacerbated some health issues for me. And I started learning with much more detail through my own personal experience how messed up so many of the institutions in this country are, and how anti-working class many of the institutions in this country are, especially the big pharmaceutical industries and the like. And as I sort of started to recognize and get much lip service to, you know, oh, essential workers matter a lot, things of that nature, or like, you know, people's health matter, but not do any adversarial reporting against the large companies that were ruining people's lives, or investigative reporting into pharmaceutical industries, or really holding sort of all of these corporate executives to the fire, feet to their fire. I started to recognize I'd been misled in many of these cases. And as I realized I was being sort of misled and lied to in this regard, I realized that something similar was also going on with the case of Julian Assange. And during that time, when I started to realize, as I actually looked at the facts of the case rather than relying on the hearsay from a media that was very interested, especially on the liberal end, in defending the Democratic Party against sort of, for example, Assange's leaks about the corruption in the DNC, I started to become a little bit interested in journalism at the time. I was very inspired by people like Abigail Martin and her Empire Files. I was looking through Glenn Greenwald's reporting on Edward Snowden again at the time, something that I'd read a little bit about earlier, but had kind of forgotten over the years. But for myself at that time, I sort of did not see any way to get into journalism to talk about the things that I felt were important, because the field seemed so directed towards this very partisan squabble and protecting the interests of the ruling class. And so I think that is kind of a sad thing. As for myself, at least, it was a bit of a fleeting interest, but I can imagine that there are many other students of my age out there who might be interested in journalism, but then they look at sort of these two pillars of repression. One of them is explicit state power, in particular the prosecution of Julian Assange, and think, oh gosh, that's terrifying. That's not something I want to get so involved with, or feel afraid of sort of the repression that's being practiced. And then also that sort of softer ideological constraints that exist in the media, where it feels as if you step out of line, then you're someone who is not desired, someone who's troublesome, and someone who might not be able to keep a job for a while. And so both of those things have to be rolled back. And the way I see it, the prosecution of Julian Assange is sort of hardening and sort of like making more concrete this sort of soft sort of censorship that has been occurring for a while, especially as journalism has become a more professionalized white collar position. And so the way I see it, journalism has always been something where the ruling class has tried to exert power over it in order to influence what people think and believe. And there's a struggle between the people to get the information that benefits them and understand the world around them better versus the ruling class. He put it in his book, to do terrible things, go to war abroad, overthrow foreign governments, and sort of set up the world in the benefit of empire. And I think it's super important for us to be rolling back this trend. And one of the first steps for that is to free Julian Assange.
Great. Well, we'll hear from Sam now.
Yeah, I mean, that was great, and I'm really happy to follow it. And props to you for reading about this case when you were in high school, because I actually I came to it a bit late. And I think for me, growing up, you know, the just in general, everything WikiLeaks reported on, and the war on terror, or so-called war on terror, the Snowden's leaks, all of that are things that, like, they were huge in the news. Of course, I was aware of them, but I was also a kid. I was not paying attention to the news as much. And but yeah, I grew up in this thing that I think a lot of people my age or younger relate to, which is that we've always just known this post 9/11 world where the US goes and I guess even before then it was going and doing whatever it wanted, but I mean, really cracking down on any resistance to war, any resistance to surveillance. And so that was in the background. And I always, you know, sensed a bit that it was wrong. I was always very anti-war, but I still really believed that the press, you know, there were problems, but that as an institution, there really could be a way to make a difference. And I, in college, eventually decided to major in journalism, inspired by some of the reporting that you mentioned, Abby Martin, Empire Files, Glenn Greenwald, Democracy Now! As well. You know, notably no mainstream news outlets. And even then, that whole time, I only sort of really knew about Assange, and what I knew was that he was like this seedy character. But it was when he was, well, so before that, I'm, you know, friends with a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community, and I learned about Chelsea Manning, not as the source for WikiLeaks, but as a trans rights activist. And through learning about her, I then became aware of, oh, like, it's really messed up that she was imprisoned and tortured and just ostracized for revealing truthful information of war crimes. And so that sort of broke through the mold a little bit on my sentiment towards WikiLeaks, but it wasn't really until Assange was arrested from the embassy so brutally. And to me, you know, at the time, I still believed some of the smears about him, still bought into them. But those aside, it was so obvious to me, it's clear what they're doing here. They're trying to set a precedent that will shut down the right to a free press and the function of a free press. And I started getting heated that more of my classmates in journalism school and professors and the administration just didn't want to talk about it, and kind of just didn't want to touch Assange. No, he's this, you know, it's more complicated. This isn't really like journalism. And yeah, I started just putting around flyers around my school. I talked to some of my friends and people I was closer with in the program. I was still a bit new to speaking out publicly. So in hindsight, I probably could have done more. But yeah, as I started really challenging my professors and the administration on this, it became pretty clear that it's this institutional pressure to not talk about controversy, to not really challenge power, that's ingrained even through journalism schools. It's because these schools need to keep their funding from, MSNBC so that they can send their students to internships. And there's the pressure, I think, of the institution of journalism as a way to really, not serve the people, not really cause people to take up what it should be, journalism as a public service. It's so ingrained to instead really, create this hierarchy, create this system of elitism where the people in power are protected, and maybe sometimes you challenge things a bit here and there, but you don't cross certain lines. So from there, I became really disillusioned with journalism and started really seeing, just how much the media, the mainstream media's coverage of Assange was part of the problem, that it's not just that the government, that the state is trying to silence him for what he did, but even mainstream media will play a certain role in going along with this. And, I'm sure there's more thoughts I can share there, but essentially I decided, okay, well, I can't change this system, but I can cover this. And so I went to protests in DC and wrote about them on my Medium page. I made a podcast. I interviewed independent journalists and activists who were covering this. And through that, I became convinced that absolutely we have a big pressure we're up against. We have a lot of disinformation about this case we're up against. But when you do talk to people and when you do get really to the heart of the issue, people are more receptive, and especially younger people who, in a way, are like me, heard the smears, but also are so used to understanding there's something very messed up about the world that we've been growing up in. And Assange tried to expose it, and he's being punished for it. And our ability as we get older to do what he did is really dependent on what happens with him now.
Great. Well, thank you, Sam, and we'll look forward to discussion after, but we'll hear first from Esther, and then we can have some questions and more discussion.
Well, I think so much has been said already. I'm not sure that I don't want to repeat some of the important comments that have been made, but I made a few notes. And tomorrow is the anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, what Russia calls a special military operation. And I think, reporting from here in DC, it's been really remarkable, really, to see so much of the true story about that conflict not be covered. That, tomorrow I actually tore up my show. I was going to do something. I had an amazing conversation with 4 scholars on Monday: Gerald Horn, Robin D.G. Kelly, Clarence Lucene, and Sharice Burden-Stelly. And it was really about the attack on truth. And that's what this conversation is about also. So I want to link those ideas, but I set it aside because I could put that show on later. But since tomorrow is the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, and I've been beset even by so-called left media about a certain narrative that leaves out very important information about that conflict. And I feel like I've been subjected to this mass psyop for the past year, and that I'm living in this psyop here in Washington, D.C. full of theater around Zelensky coming to Congress, the people shaking hands and patting backs and all of that. But we never really hear about the fact that the war did not begin last year. It began in 2014, that tens of thousands of Ukrainians have been murdered and killed by the Kiev regime. And so this is one of those untruths or truths that cannot be spoken of, that cannot be definitely not spoken of in corporate media. So it's to live in really a kind of a psyop. And I don't know a better example of what we're talking about than that. I think the sister from AssangeBoston said she had maybe a 1-minute clip of Julian Assange talking about the Afghanistan war being kind of like a money laundering scheme. And as we go over $100 billion in terms of our tax dollars spent to support this war, to buy weapons, it becomes a real money laundering operation for the weapons industry. And so I don't know if she has that to play, if she wants to play it, but maybe we should play that because it won't get played today or tomorrow on the anniversary. So maybe in this humble setting, we can play that.
Okay, yeah, and actually, I found a document about WikiLeaks in Ukraine I can present after, so go ahead.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war. Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan.
Right. So it was a 30-second clip, but I think that just as he was speaking about Afghanistan, the same thing is true in Ukraine. And, you know, as Jeremy covered the Rage Against the War rally this past weekend in DC. There's going to be another huge rally March 18th. That is on the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. And it's very important, I think, that activists, artists, journalists, all kinds of people are recognizing the link between these demonstrations, these wars, and how the US position in the current war is seen by the majority of the world as hypocritical because of our roles in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, in our own hemisphere, just the whole Vietnam, just our whole history of these wars of tremendous violence and aggression that have killed tens of millions of people around the world, even in my lifetime, and so, I think I wanted to talk about that first, and I'm glad we were able to play that clip. I mentioned the panel that I had earlier this week with these tremendous scholars, and I wanted to bring that up because when what they talked about is something I believe also is that, we're living in a time of emergent fascism in this country. And that word is really scary to people, but we have to look at things really squarely in the eye. I mean, what do we have here? We have books being banned. We having teachers facing fines or a felony if they teach true American history. We have libraries banning books. We have legislators, politicians telling people that they cannot say that there is systemic racism in this country. So if we have a system here in this country where truth is under attack, this attack on Julian Assange is part of the same thing. And it's part of a system that is authoritarian. It's not in keeping with any type of democratic values. And I think people have to look at that squarely in the eye. the same type of repression that people have, that this country has practiced around the world for, centuries, in terms of treating the whole world as if, and people of color, what they call the global South now, as less than, subjecting them to torture, to murder, to these murderous dictators that we've propped up. It's all kind of coming home, in the sense that we can have our own people, subjected to these same types of arbitrary rules, to have a Julian Assange, who's not even a citizen of the United States, subjected to some types of arbitrary rules of the United States. So I think those are my comments. I didn't want to repeat anything that anyone else said. In terms of the young journalists, I salute you, I admire you. I want to encourage you in any way that I can. I know that I have taught, and I have had really these mixed feelings about teaching, because I didn't know where I was sending my students to. What could I do to encourage them, and what could I do to develop in terms of media outlets, people who I knew would be good editors, people who I could trust. Where would I send my students to? And it's created a real dilemma for me in terms of really not wanting to teach, in a way, and feeling like if I can teach some people who want to volunteer for my show, or, and we can create media content, no matter how humble, that's a better use of my time. And even though, it's not certainly not a situation that is, paying me, right? So anyway, and on that same note, I made a note here of the name Darnella Frazier. Darnella Frazier is a young teenager who shot the video of George Floyd being murdered. And she won a Pulitzer, but it's not really important that she won a Pulitzer, but she documented something. She was a journalist. She was in the field documenting probably the most important video of many people's lifetime right now, in terms of documenting state terror, state violence, and how that is such a normal part of people's life here. And if she hadn't shot that video, that case would not have happened. It would not have been recognized as a murder. The whole 2020 uprising against racism around the globe would not have happened, because no one would have believed the people who said what happened, that it happened that way. And if you look at the police report, the press release issued right after this happened, and this is the simple kind of press release that cop reporters will get, that I used to get when I was in New York covering cops, that it said nothing in terms of what actually happened that day. So I just want to encourage any young journalist who is listening or will hear this video to, something that I think and why can't I remember his name, but that, an editor said once that, he spoke to us at Columbia, and he said, just come into the field, come in and do the work as best you can. And it's really up to us. I agree with the speakers before me that it's really up to us to make clear that Julian Assange must be free, and that it's really necessary for all of us to demand that, and to do the work in the meantime, and to continue to report the things we see. Trust our eyes and ears. That's what I used to tell my students. Trust your eyes and ears. Thank you. Evidence,
Great.
yes, the importance of evidence. Yes.
Well, thank you, for your comments. And I wanted to open up maybe for question. I just added in the chat, maybe I'll do share screen briefly. I added this document about Ukraine from WikiLeaks. Oh, it said host disabled participants screen sharing. Maybe you can click on this WikiLeaks document that I put with the share screen. Or otherwise, the people in the audience could just click on it, because I think that's an example of, the government knew what they were doing. This document document shows, the embedded process, it's got the Russian account, and shows that I think the U.S. government is intent on provoking conflict. They can take easy measures. I mean, they know what they're doing. They can easily forge a harmonious relation with the Russians by not crossing certain red lines, yet they do it. And there are, I think, ulterior motives, as Assange, in that interview we had, that they want a permanent war, whether it's the military-industrial complex, whether it's the oil interests who want to dominate the entire Central Asian region and want to weak Russia, so they want to bog them down in Ukraine. These may be the real motives as to why the U.S. is doing this, and may be related to power relation and the fear that the U.S. power is slipping, and that they need a major war as the only way they can revitalize U.S. world power. Whatever the case, yeah. So I think these kind of documents, again, underscore the point of how valuable these documents are to understand, world affairs, and to understand the U.S. government and its responsibility, like what Esther was saying, that the media, just presented like Putin got up one day and decided to invade Ukraine. He was a madman, and he was bent on restoring the Russian Empire, and Ukraine was the first step, and all these other countries were next. And it leaves out the whole backstory of NATO expansion, of the U.S. coup in Ukraine. And I think there are many other documents. If you would spend time on the WikiLeaks, I believe you would find a lot of other valuable documents about the U.S. involvement in Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union, and the U.S. agenda and interests. So if you understand that, you can start to see through the propaganda, and that's how I think we can build a movement, against this. What Max Blumenthal called at the rally a satanic war machine and a satanic empire that, as Esther said, has killed millions of people and is provoking a world war right now. And I think Tulsi Gabbard had a great speech at the rally, and she said, we're all united in one thing at this rally, is that we value human life, and we don't want to see these wars. We don't want to see this war expanding. It's already killed millions, or I don't know how many Ukrainians have died, but a huge number of Russians and Ukrainians have died, and many more will die if it escalates into a world war or nuclear war. So I think we need to build a social movement that's anti-imperialist and that connects the domestic ill. I think what I see is that too often a lot of these social protest movements focus on I mean, it's an important issue like police brutality, but they don't make the connection between problem at home and the empire abroad. And there needs to be more of a consciousness among the young people as we develop a strong anti-imperialist movement. So again, it's just the pitch. I mean, I'm probably speaking to the choir, but if we can spread, as teachers, if we can use these documents in courses, I think is valuable, just for educating students. And then they can see, as they see the value of these documents, they'll also see that the smear against Assange is wrong.
Mhm.
So maybe we'll turn it over now for questions, unless any of the panel members want to respond to any others or any points they want to add. We can have others who are on the call or in the audience raise questions, or if they want to say anything.
I can ask a question. I'd
Sure.
like to ask Esther where I can see this film that was taken at Ferguson that shows what really happened. Is it on YouTube or anywhere like that?
I was actually speaking about the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis.
Oh, okay.
So it was online, and I think it still is the original video that she shot.
Right. I think I've seen that. I mean, that's clearly the case. I just wanted more education on Michael Brown's situation if I could find it. So I just misunderstood you, but thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Here's a
Yeah,
question.
Frank has his hand up.
I guess I wanted to loop back some of the comments that Esther made about fascism in the United States at this time, to have sort of a media that is not focused on bringing people the truth and instead playing, partisan games and things of that nature sort of enables. So I was doom scrolling on Twitter 2 days ago, something I try not to do too much, but I saw, or actually it was yesterday. And there was a video of Donald Trump in East Palestine, Ohio, visiting before Mayor Pete, who's the transportation secretary, did. And there were people in the crowd who were saying, "Thank you for not forgetting us." And from the way I see it, what sort of enabled this situation for a fraudulent con man like Donald Trump to go and act like he's pro-worker and against sort of the looting railroad industries, which enabled this horrific natural disaster and crash to happen, is the failure of media to hold people like Pete Buttigieg or sort of the Obama administration and the Trump administration responsible for caving to lobbies, and instead forming a protective coalition around these people to defend them. And that is what sort of gives the possibility of others to occupy as pro-worker. And that is an avenue towards creating fascistic movements in the United States, because there's no actual left, or I guess even honest reporting that is standing for the people.
And yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, so others want to weigh in, or yeah, I mean, I guess another question is, how do we strategize? How can we build a bigger movement, to support Julian Assange, to end the war in Ukraine, or the weapon shipments to Ukraine, to cut the military budget and spend the money on education and healthcare. What do you anyone want to weigh in on what they think the way forward is, as far as that, or breaking the stranglehold of the media? How can independent media have more of an impact on society?
I was going to just mention again the rally March 18th on the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. I know it's going to be a really huge rally, but it is one action, but it seems to be important for people to take to the streets to have an outsized presence that way, because corporate media doesn't really pay attention. Even, it may not pay attention that day, but it's harder to ignore it. And also, if we can be more transnational in our coverage and, pay attention to the mass demonstrations happening in France or other places, because what they try to do is they tell us that, oh, no, nothing to see here. Nobody's doing anything. Everybody's just mollified, watching the Super Bowl or whatever. And it's not true that people are, marching, around the world. So I think that that's important, just to stay in the streets as much as possible and to link up across borders as journalists, as activists, to do that. And that's how we can continue to build a movement. And I think that in many ways, independent journalism, independent media is making an impact. They're growing, the sites are growing, even if I don't catch them all the time, I'll see sites like, Breakthrough News, or, they have 150,000 subscribers now on YouTube, or pardon me, George Galloway in London, he has his show, and he's saying he's trying to get to 1 million subscribers or viewers or something like that. He's, touting his numbers, and, other outlets, they are growing constantly because people are hungry for something that is true, and people don't trust corporate media now. It's just, who can stand it, past the headlines, or maybe even media that we consider left or progressive. Very often it is, I don't know what's happening, but it is not progressive. It is not anti-imperialist. And so.
Well, and they were spearheading. It was the MSNBC that was spearheading the Russiagate for years. And actually this rally in Ukraine, this rally was held last week. Apparently MSNBC did a very short segment on it, and they labeled it like a pro-Putin rally. And they spotlight, there was one Soviet flag in the audience, but there were many different signs and, a huge diversity. They fixated on one Russian flag and one communist flag. And there were a number of Russians there, and I talked to them. It was very interesting. After I met several Russians, and it was really good to hear their perspective. And they had a very good perspective. But yeah, the way they cover it was just so biased. From my understanding, if you look online, like even Democracy Now!, I find has been very biased on some topics if you follow that show carefully. And even on the Assange, like there was a segment I saw with Max Blumenthal and some other people who know, like Amy Goodman was the host of this Assange event a few weeks ago, but a tribunal. But they pointed to an episode like during the election when they attacked Assange. They had guests on, even Naomi Klein, attacking Assange, that he was pro-Trump somehow, and he was giving the election to Trump because of those documents with regard to Bernie Sanders and I guess some of the Clinton email that were leaked. So even though the alternative media can't always be trusted, but they may get their funding. You don't know as far as things like Democracy Now! Or Counterpunch or wherever, they have to get funding from somewhere, and sometimes it could be like corporate or foundations. So I don't know where that leaves us, but
that at the time of the Belmarsh Tribunal, I was working as interim program director at the Pacifica radio station here in DC, and we aired it live. We aired the Belmarsh Tribunal.
That was great. Generally, it was a great program.
And then before that, earlier in the day, my show ran, and I did a kind of a replay of a lot of the people who rallied outside the State Department. The Department of Justice back in October. So we had quite a full Assange day, blasting in every cab, every cab. And, we have a lot of cab drivers that play our station. So all the people getting in the cab or the Uber, and some of these people are influential people. They get to hear, what the cab driver wants to listen to. So that's.
Yeah. Well, and I would agree. It is making a difference, and you see a shift in consciousness, and you see a lot of young people, or even older people I meet. Even because I live in Oklahoma, a conservative area, but even them, they were tuning into RT, or they're looking just for other alternative sources of news. And so I'll recommend stuff to them. And I think, some of the old ideological divide don't really matter. They just want truth. They don't. And many of them are very supportive of Assange, including, people identify as conservatives or libertarians. So, I think that was one thing at that rally. Some of the speakers, were emphasizing it's good to have a unity when people are unified on some things like freeing Assange, ending the warfare state, freeing Assange, having more transparent government, restoring democracy. So I think, there are tremendous opportunities now for alternative media. So for the, you guys who are just getting starting your career, I think there may be great doors that open up for you. I hope. But I also agree. These rallies, it's a good start. It's good for networking. It's also, it makes an impression. And at a certain point, the media will have to report if there are huge numbers coming out. So.
Can I hop in?
Sure.
Just because, I'm really loving the conversation, especially like, how do we build this movement? And absolutely, I think there's a lot of really great ways that we're seeing independent media build. But yeah, one thing I think we've touched on is the question of the power that moneyed interests have in what is covered. And to me, and this connects to I think also the Ohio train disaster and really everything. Obviously, it's not the only solution. It certainly takes a long time to build, but I think a really important way to challenge the power of money is unionize every newsroom. I mean, one thing I think that's really important that we're seeing is at the New York Times in particular, certainly not like the exact opposite of independent media, generally a mouthpiece for imperialism. We are seeing not over imperialism, but over their really vile attacks on trans people, workers organizing, not just for better wages, not just for, bread and butter demands, but really to have power over the editorial line when it is clearly being used to attack an oppressed group. And I think that's something to really think about. And this connects to the Ohio train derailment. I mean, what happened right before this crisis, there was a plan for workers to potentially strike, which would have brought these issues to the forefront. And Biden, along with bipartisan support, including so-called socialists, busted that strike. But this disaster wouldn't have happened had the organized power of those who run the railroads actually been able to challenge the corporate interests that run them. And imagine if every news outlet in Ohio, had unions that could really fight for this is what we need to cover. And if you're not going to be accountable to your audience, to what is actually important for challenging power, have fun trying to run this editorial line without us, without the people who edit, without the people who write, without the people who are in charge of clicking the thing that makes the articles go up. And I think that's an approach we really need to be thinking about. Imagine if, and we're seeing tech workers starting to really say, we will not allow Google or the New York Times or whatever to run if it keeps supporting Israeli apartheid and their really vile attacks on Palestine. Imagine if whenever news outlets, as Esther mentioned, you get all these police reports and they say nothing. And I know a lot of news outlets will just copy and paste them. Imagine if reporters said, no, we won't run this and you can't make us work. You can't make us because we're united here. I think that's a really important strategy that, of course, it will take time to develop and it'll take work to develop. But that collective power is something that is we're starting to see people take advantage of. We're starting to see more newsrooms unionize, and not just for bread and butter demands, but really like to fight oppression, to fight news being used in service of oppression. And I think that's a really promising opportunity that I think is really good to think about. How could we get that to be used to free Julian Assange?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
If I could add to that.
And yeah, there's a question from David. Go ahead, and then we'll get to a question from David to Esther after.
And there's a question in the audience as well.
What's that? Dave. Okay, yeah. Well, I think Tarang, if you want to weigh in just quickly, and then we'll go to David and his question.
Yeah, I really love what Sam brought up about sort of unionization in these newsrooms and sort of having sort of a workers' movement, which is encouraging better sort of coverage of the media and events and things that are actually true and respond to people's living conditions. And the project that I'm very interested in is sort of taking this sort of labor energy and giving it a more internationalist approach, because there has been a lot of loss in our education and understanding how so much of the US interventions abroad have been directed towards keeping other countries underdeveloped so that it's easier to extract cheaper resources from them And also in doing so, they cheapen the value of American labor and also mess up everything for workers in other countries as well. So as this sort of like class consciousness is built in the United States, and there are organizations, I think, that have started doing this. I think one is called Labor Fights Back Against Racism and Imperialism, which is reaching out to unions and sort of embarking on this political education journey to help workers understand how deeply their interests are tied with workers around the world, and how it is actually the US empire that is keeping workers both in the United States and abroad subjugated by means of military power, by means of terrible trade agreements like NAFTA, for example, and also modern financial institutions, which are using sort of these conditionalities to force countries to sort of give their workers worse deals, and then that also affects workers in the United States. And so when it comes to Assange, tying this back to the main topic here, there's a lot of shared interest between labor and freeing Julian Assange, because if we are able to figure out what operations the US is embarking in abroad, that gives labor so much more of a direction to understand what we should be fighting for in order to improve the working and material conditions of people in the United States and also people abroad, especially in the global South, which has been exploited and stolen from by the United States for the last so many years.
Great, thank you.
We
And then now
we
we'll
have a
turn to
comment
David.
from a gentleman here in the audience who is named Joe. I don't have a camera to train on him, but he does have a microphone. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay,
Yes,
then we'll get
I'd like to,
your question after. Okay, go ahead, Joe.
my question is, Julian Assange did his time for jumping bail, and he's in Belmarsh prison, and he has no charges against him. He didn't commit a crime in England. And why is that? In 1697, they had a habeas corpus rule in England that you have to be told why you were in prison. And couldn't you use that as an angle of putting somebody in prison for absolutely no crime? I mean, this is the part of the story I can't understand why the British aren't really protesting against putting somebody in prison without any charges in the worst prison of all, Belmarsh prison. So, I mean, if you emphasize that, that would bring out more people, I think, for the Julian Assange freeing him, because he's not committed a crime in England.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And also, I mean, with the Espionage Act, that's a very arcane law that dates back to 1917. And I mean, the fact that he's not even an American resident or citizen, how could you try somebody on the espionage? And I mean, espionage usually would entail, giving secrets to an enemy for military purposes. So, I mean, I think a lot of people have hit on that, but I think it's a point to be underscored. And many feel the Espionage Act has been used just to prosecute whistleblowers. And I mean, it's an outrage the way it's been invoked, and I think the law should be removed as well. So. But I don't know if the others want to respond as well. If not, we'll also turn to David's question. Is David there?
David. David,
Hi,
unmute.
hello. Hi.
There you go.
Sorry. I had a question, well, for all of you guys, but I wanted to aim it toward Esther because I know her from Breakthrough News, and I'm a big fan of her work there. I'm just curious because I've heard different takes from different people on working together with ideologically different people on issues like Assange, where forces kind of connect on the same issue. Like I know Tulsi Gabbard was at the last rally a week ago. She's been hard against trans people, and I'm not in support of that. How would the socialist left, or the left in general, I guess, even though it's not monolithic, navigate cooperating with forces that, or groups that don't align with them on other key issues?
Well, I don't, consider myself an expert on this I actually had a conversation on the air about this, I think yesterday, and I think a number of people have addressed it on social media. But I think that the March 18th rally is kind of a template for, and it's a template that the socialist left has used for some time now in terms of organizing with like-minded people and people who you can have a general agreement around core principles, right? And so if you see another group organizing an event and you can't agree with them on core principles, not necessarily everything, but on core principles, then you have a right to choose who you organize with. You know, you have a right to choose where you feel safe, where you feel you can be in solidarity with these people, and that you are not selling out an important part of your core values to organize with them. So one of the things that I heard at the rally, because I watched, I saw some of it on YouTube, and all of it actually, I mean, all of it that the camera captured, and on some posts afterward on social media was that they were blaming some people not joining with them because of a particular speaker, and maybe how that speaker had certain views on the LGBTQ community. And I know as a Black woman, a straight Black woman, that my differences with the rally had nothing to do with that per se, even though I don't condone anyone being bigoted against LGBTQ community, or in the case of that particular speaker, being an Islamophobe, and maybe even working, as in the military, against, Black and brown people in Africa. So I know a lot of my understanding of having differences with the organizers of the rally is that the longstanding views of libertarians and that people who head that party toward the Civil Rights Act, the idea that the rights of human beings being more important than property or private property, that you can say a person can't come into my restaurant because it's my private property. And the idea that we want to use our, that we want to have a community where all people are actually equal, and that the money going to drop bombs in Ukraine, that money being spent there should be spent here for jobs, education, healthcare, and all types of public goods that I don't think that libertarians necessarily support. So I don't begrudge anybody having a rally, and I don't know anybody who said like, don't go to your rally. It's just that, we all have a right to organize with who we want to organize with, and keep our core principles intact and not violate our own ideas about what freedom is, what freedom is. So I was glad to see the Assange people out there. I saw them, and I was glad to see so many people cheer for Julian Assange. And I think that's a core issue. If that's a core issue that people can rally around, that's great. I don't know if people were card checked at the Department of Justice. I think there were libertarians out there at the Department of Justice. And I didn't say, oh, okay, I can't speak because so-and-so. And, and I actually heard some people say some things at the Department of Justice I thought were really ignorant, right? But hey, by and large, 99% of it was right on. So I'm not going to not speak out for Julian Assange because someone who I disagree with is also speaking out for him. You know what I mean? They can have their forum, I can have my forum, and that's how I'm looking at this particular issue, right?
Thank you.
Sam, would you like to have the last word, since you're
article was the inspiration for this event?
Sure. Oh, wow. I wish I'd prepared a little bit more. No, I mean, one thing I think, as I said, yeah, when I was in college, I did start, this is where I started really advocating for Assange. And while I think in my opening remarks, I focused on my takeaways of what's negative, what wasn't budging. But, you know, I think a mistake I made was not really like going more to my professors and more to the administration to try to speak up than just going to my classmates, many of whom are not, you know, going to outright become Assange supporters, but who, yeah, are more open. And I think because we know that we have futures ahead of us, right? We're very young, we have our whole lives to live. And if we want to go into journalism, Assange needs to be free. I mean, if we really want to go into journalism, not just make money, but like do the work that makes us feel good, that makes a difference, Assange needs to be free. And a lot of us, I think, are going into it for the right reasons, have more open minds on issues of war, on issues of injustice. And I think I just have a lot of optimism that that we're seeing people of my generation and younger really taking up other fights against injustice, and that this is one that people my age and people entering into journalism can be won over to with the facts that Assange exposed, the facts of his case. And I'm optimistic about that and really want to encourage people to really think about, yeah, reaching younger people who I think have an energy that we can bring to this fight.
Thank you very much. This concludes our program for this evening. Many thanks to all our participants and to the Community Church of Boston. Our work to end the prosecution of Julian Assange will continue until all charges are dropped against him and he is free. We ask you to take action by doing a few simple things each week, such as calling Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and writing Joe Biden, demanding that they drop the charges against Julian Assange. You can call Merrick Garland at 202-353-1555 and write Joe Biden at whitehouse.gov/contact. Tell them that publishing the truth is not a crime, that journalism is not a crime. And you can also see these contacts and other suggestions for actions on our national website, AssangeDefense.org. Go to the Take Action section. For those of you who are here in person, please stop by our information table for literature and to sign our petition to our Mass Senators, Markey and Warren, and sign up for our mailing list. For those who are not here, contact us at AssangeBoston@gmail.com to receive our updates. Good night, and please help us free Julian Assange. Good night, everybody.
And one final word from Community Church of Boston, where this event was hosted. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, SusanMcLucas and Paula Iasella. Did I say her last name right? For giving us the honor of hosting this event. We, by the way, want to let you know that we awarded Julian Assange our 2021 Sacco and Vanzetti Award, which we give out once a year. It was received by his brother and his father, the Shiptons, and it was a wonderful event. We raised $900 towards the defense of Julian Assange. And last word is that most recently we gave the award to the Holy Land Foundation 5, who are 5 Palestinian businessmen who are imprisoned for raising funds to feed children in Gaza and the West Bank. Find out more about us. We're at www.communitychurchofboston.org. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to all the speakers who joined us. And to all of you, buenas noches. Good night, everybody.